Hello, I'm Marsha Blackburn, and welcome to the latest edition of the Blackburn Report. This year, we are going to do things just a little bit differently, and in addition to this monthly show, you are going to be able to download more up-to-date segments on a weekly basis by logging onto my website and downloading the podcast. I hope that you'll find these shorter, more topical segments useful as you follow the important issues that we're addressing in Washington. For the first of these podcasts, I am so very pleased to welcome Stephen Moore. Stephen is the founder of the Club for Growth. He's a member of the Wall Street Journal editorial board and a contributing editor of the National Review. Stephen is a leading free market economist, one of my favorite people, and I am thrilled that he is able to join us today. So
Hi,
welcome.
Marsha. How are you? Nice to see you again.
Thank you. Okay. What's wrong with the economy? Let's start there.
Well, I think it's a result of a couple of things. Overspending in Washington for the last 10 years, where the budget's gone from less than $2 trillion to nearly $4 trillion in one decade, and that doesn't include any of this money in this fake stimulus bill. Then we've had, I think, lost control of our money system, where we've just been pouring money into the economy, and that causes inflation and a weak dollar. And I think the other thing is the economy is just right now gripped with fear. And this is why I fault both President Bush last year and President Obama now. They're not reducing the fear. Every time they talk, they say, oh, the economy is a catastrophe. We need confidence right now, and I don't think the politicians are sounding very confident.
Well, I think you're exactly right, and the size of the budget is a big part of that.
Yes.
And you have talked about when you worked with Reagan, that was the first time we hit that $1 trillion budget. And, of course, for many of us, President
Isn't it hard to believe, by the way, that it was only
like
a little more than 20 years ago that we hit our first $1 trillion budget, and here this year we're going to borrow $2 trillion. We're going to borrow, and the budget's going to be somewhere near $4 trillion.
And that will be our deficit. It's all part of our deficit spending. So it is just phenomenal when you look at those
and the problem is these numbers are so big, it's hard for a lot of people to get their arms around it. I mean, the one statistic I always give, and we used this in the Wall Street Journal editorial last week, that we will borrow more money this year in Washington than the federal government did from 1776 through 1980. So we'll borrow more money in 1 year than we did in 200 years?
It is phenomenal.
Right.
And then they're borrowing a lot of this money for the stimulus. Talk just a little bit about your impression on the stimulus bill, because I'm very upset about the way it's been carried
First of all, I'm really
forward.
proud of the Republicans. Virtually every Republican in Washington voted against this. I think it's the first step towards getting the American people to understand the Republicans should be the fiscal conservative party. This will not work, unfortunately. It will provide a short-term little bump to the economy as we spend this money, Marsha, but the problem is, where is the money going to come from? And when I debate liberal economists on this, they say, oh, we're going to do all these wonderful things with the money, but they can't answer the question, okay, but the money doesn't come from the tooth fairy. It has to come from somewhere. We're either going to have to tax people, or we're going to have to borrow the money on top of the $10 trillion of debt we already have, or what are we going to do? Print money and just inflate the currency? That's what banana republics do. Our debt has risen so much that for the first time in my life, I'm really very concerned about the financial future of our country and what we're doing to our children and grandchildren. I use the term financial child abuse for what we're doing in Washington right now.
That is so interesting you say that. I had a constituent this weekend who came up to me and she said, it always makes me mad when the government spends money that I haven't made yet.
That's
but she said, I have the 6-month-old grandchild. She had her grandchild, and she said, what infuriates me and makes me want to come to the Capitol and just shake people is the fact that they're spending her money.
Right.
They are spending her money, and I thought, that really is the visual image of what is happening.
It's almost like every time
here.
a baby is born today, we slap $20,000 debt.
Well, and we look at what has happened before, and we know what works. When you have tax reductions,
that's right.
When you are aggressive about reforming that tax code, and when you reduce spending,
right.
And we have to reduce.
Well, my favorite example, by the way, you being from Tennessee, I always use Tennessee as an example. And you and I think when we first met, that, which was about 10 years ago. You were in the
State
state
income tax,
legislature and
right.
going after the state income tax. But, you know, it's interesting, isn't it, that the 9 states that today in the United States, like Tennessee and states like, you know, Nevada and states like Florida and states like Texas, those states actually have been doing pretty well economically. The states with high taxes are doing very poorly. It's the same thing with countries. If we have high spending and high debt and high taxes in our country, we're not going to be competitive with the Japanese and the Chinese and the Europeans. So we are eroding our competitiveness, and that's the one reason that it's very difficult to create jobs right now in this economy.
Right, and that's why we're going to keep Tennessee income tax free.
I
want to talk a little bit about that debt market, because one of my concerns, and I've read some of the things that you and other economists have written, talking about the debt market and the private sector's or the investment community's appetite for our debt, and when do we hit that tipping point?
I get everywhere I go around the country, that's what people ask is, who's going to buy all this debt? I mean, we're swimming in uncharted territory here with all the debt that we're spewing out right now. Now, in the past few years, there were countries like the Japanese, especially the Chinese, the Russians, that have been buying U.S. debt, especially the Chinese. What happens if the Chinese lose their appetite for U.S. debt and stop buying it? And I think that you're already seeing signs that the Chinese engine of growth is really slowing down, so they're not going to be able to buy as much of this debt. And the problem is going to be, as I see it, Marsha, is that as the demand for these Treasury securities falls, as we're trying to get $2 trillion people to buy $2 trillion of debt, how we're going to be able to get them to buy it? We're going to have to raise the interest rate. And that raises interest rates around the economy. So when you think about the ailing housing market right now, the worst thing we could do to help the housing market is raise mortgage interest rates, because it's going to make housing even more unaffordable for people.
That's right. Well, listen, your wisdom and insights are always appreciated by Tennesseans and by me. So thank you so much.
Keep fighting the no income tax. Tennessee, those people never go away who want to bring back an income tax.
We know that you can always count on the fact that when you reduce the tax burden, when you reduce the regulatory burden, and when you reduce what a government entity spends, your revenues are going to rise.
Well, I remember so vividly when you and I were fighting that fight. Remember, there was that rally in front of the Capitol.
Yes,
I remember I was on talk radio. I could hear the people bumping their horns and saying no income tax.
The sound of freedom.
Well put.
And people showed up to defend their rights.
It was amazing.
That's
and
right.
You know, that's what we need now, isn't it? We need the American people to rise up against all this debt and overspending in Washington. Whatever happened to the old idea of a balanced budget?
Yes.
We've moved so far away from that.
Well, yes, and there are those here that do want to continue to grow the government and expand the government. I have termed this stimulus bill as a big government stimulus.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Because what it's growing is jobs in the federal government and programs in the federal government, but the money for infrastructure and creating the environment for private sector jobs growth does not exist in this piece.
You've heard me say this before, but when there's more money in this bill for federal bureaucrats to buy cars than there is for small business tax relief to create jobs, I mean, that's a misplaced priority. And that's the real tragedy of this $1 trillion bill. It's what we're not getting anything for this. I mean, with the $1 trillion, we could suspend our income tax for the rest of the year, so no business in Tennessee or anywhere in the rest of the country would have to pay income taxes for the year. That would create jobs, but we're not getting that kind of vital tax relief because, look, small businesses are the backbone of the economy. They're the ones who create the jobs. Where's the help for them?
Well, and it does not exist in this bill, and I hear, especially from women, who right now the growth in small business, what little growth there is, it primarily is with female-owned small businesses. And I hear from them every single day about their concerns of losing some of the tax deductions that have been there that would be set to expire and not seeing those renewed, and their concerns over what that would do with their business.
Well, one of my concerns about all this debt that we've taken on is eventually, unfortunately, that's going to have to be paid for with higher taxes. So when we're talking about these small businesses, the vital engine of our growth, and they are going to be faced with higher taxes, it's going to be hard for them to grow. We're going to have a lot of small businesses die of crib death because they're not going to be able to have the kind of funds that they need. I also talked to a lot of bankers, by the way, community bankers, not the big investment banks up in New York, and they complain about one thing that Congress did last year, which was, when we passed this bailout of the big banks, these small business community banks, they say, wait a minute, why do we have to pay more taxes fund our competitors against us. And that's another thing I think we should consider is that, somebody called the bank bailout bill that Tim Geithner, the new Treasury Secretary, came up with, said, what we need in this country is the survival of the fittest. And what we're doing with all these bills is the survival of the unfittest.
You're
it's exactly
right.
backwards, isn't it?
It is backward. Well, listen, thank you for your time today.
Marsha.
Thanks for joining me, and thanks for always
and thank you for fighting the fight.
Free enterprise and capitalism. Appreciate it.
Soon.
Thanks.